Earth and the United States have had a complicated relationship that can best be explained in a series of marriages, divorces, battles for custody, restraining orders, brief affairs, hush money, and there's no way you get to keep the kids, verse watch me. In this video, we're going to explore the never-ending case of Earth v. United States, which is actually turning into a real court case called E10 v. Gov. How do we get into this mess though? Let's begin by going back to the formative years of the United States. If you're an American who's been to high school, then you've heard of Manifest Destiny. For the rest of you, and as a reminder, here's what it is. Manifest Destiny was a philosophy defined in the 1800s that people used to justify the United States expanding into wildlife or foreign territories that Americans had previously been sparse in or had not been at all. This was not a logical philosophy. It was an egotistical justification that spread the idea that Americans were sent by God to conquer everything in their path. Events such as the Louisiana Purchase and annexation of Texas were inspired by Manifest Destiny and helped to justify that idea. Eventually, though, Manifest Destiny began to cool down because it ran out of destiny to manifest. After we conquered the environment, we decided to protect it. The environmental movement slowly began to grow from the 1850s to the 1890s, but it wasn't until figures like John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt that it really began to morph into what it is today. Around the turn of the 20th century, President Theodore Roosevelt and John Muir became some of the first major figures to spread the radical idea that maybe we should care about the environment. In the 1890s, John Muir founded the Sierra Club, an environmental conservation group that still exists today. If I can only pick one person to give credit to shifting the mindsets of Americans from Manifest Destiny to conservationism, it would be John Muir. He really influenced the American beliefs, as did President Roosevelt. Before his president, Teddy Roosevelt, spent a lot of time in nature and saw the decimation of natural land and species. According to the National Park Service, TR protected nearly 230 million acres of public land, including 150 national forests and 5 national parks. TR once said, "It is also vandalism wantonly to destroy or to permit the destruction of what is beautiful in nature, whether it be a cliff, a forest, or a species of animal or bird. Here in the United States, we turn our rivers and streams into sewers and dumping grounds. We pollute the air. We destroy forests and exterminate fishes, birds, and mammals, not to speak of vulgarizing charming landscapes with hideous advertisements. But at last, it looks as if our people were awakening." These words still ring true today. We've certainly awakened more than we were before his presidency, but we've also become complacent. So the environmental movement from 1900 to 1961 was pretty much about conserving resources because we liked them and because they got us money. But when did altruistic environmentalism come into play? Well, let's go back to 1962, which was only 57 years ago. In 1962, JFK was president and The Wanderer was one of the most popular songs out there. Not to be confused with the wonderful Old English poem, which is about, interestingly, almost the exact opposite of the song. But back on point. In 1962, Rachel Carson wrote a book called Silent Spring. It alerted Americans on the negative and harmful effects of DDT, which was extremely popular at the time. It was considered so safe that commercials were made where people ate it, or even worse, it was sprayed onto children. This was also the time when lead paint was used and cigarettes were smoked indoors.
And it's perfect for ridding Fido of those unwelcome house guests. This new activated DDT powder also comes in a large pump-type dispenser that's sure death for insects over large areas outdoors.
Oh my God. Yeah, it was a different time back then. Looks like I was born in the right generation. So, after Rachel Carson's book was published, it stayed in the New York Times' bestseller list for 31 weeks. There's a Netflix series about her, and I highly recommend you watch it. The book was so influential that President Kennedy actually created an advisory panel on pesticides. Participation in groups like the Sierra Club and the Wilderness Society increased from around 123,000 to 119,000 in the 1960s. President Johnson, who came into office after JFK was assassinated, signed into law almost 300 different conservation measures. These acts could each have their own episode, but some of the most influential ones were the 1964 Wilderness Act, 1963 Clean Air Act, and the 1960 Clean Water Act. Arguably the most important was the National Environmental Policy Act, signed by President Nixon in 1970. This all alone could be its own video, but it essentially set the basis for all other environmental protection laws. Everything from 1962 to today has just been added up to the previous years. The first Earth Day was held in 1970, where 100,000 people would gather in New York City to show their support. That same year, the EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, was created. The Endangered Species Act was passed in 1973. The Superfund Act, which gets polluters to clean up their own mess, was passed in 1980. And then President Reagan came in. He wanted to free American businesses from regulations, which meant they were free to exploit the environment to their desire. When Reagan was governor of California, he even said, "If you see one redwood tree, you've seen them all." That really sums up his position, and if it weren't for him, the US might have continued on its path to be a haven for environmental protection. We might even solve climate change by now. Because despite continued public support for environmentalism, Reagan really hurt the movement. It's kind of like how you can have a great party, but if someone came in there, stopped the music, tore down the decorations, and started a fight, it would really sour the mood. Reagan really soured the mood with a lot of stuff. But hey, corporations and the military are the only part of America that matter, right? Now that we know the history of environmentalism in the United States, we can examine how Earth of the United States is doing right now. We're going to look at the American people, companies, and government. Let's go. So far, we've learned that a while back, people care no more about the environment than I assumed Bill Gates would care at a dollar store. I mean, it seemed like there was unlimited potential. Today, though, manifest destiny has evolved into man we're screwed destiny. But how do the American people feel about this? To figure it out, let's look at the polls. When we were researching Gallup polls on the environment, we found some interesting results. For one, the amount of Americans who consider themselves environmentalists has declined from 76% in 1989 to 42% in 2018, despite 57% of Americans supporting environmental protection over economic growth in 2018, and 73% of agreeing with more strongly enforcing environmental protections. A Pew Research poll indicated that, in 2016, 75% of people said they were particularly concerned about the environment in their daily lives. Another interesting, but not particularly surprising statistic is that wanting the government to do, quote, whatever it takes to protect the environment is a very partisan issue. The amount of Democrats who agree with this has pretty much stayed stable from 1994 to 2016, only increasing by about 5% to 90%. But the amount of Republicans who agree on this has decreased from 71% in 1994 to 52% in 2016. The study didn't say this, but the widening gap in apparent disinterest by Republicans is likely due to the fact that saving the environment has been posed as somehow hurting the economy, despite the fact that renewable energy provides up to 5 times as many jobs as fossil fuels, and despite the fact that climate change is going to bring disastrous effects to world economies. But I digress. According to Futurity, in 2018, 74% of people believe in climate change. I don't like using the phrase believe in climate change. For the same reason I wouldn't use the phrase I believe in gravity. A more accurate wording would be, do you understand the effects of climate change? But let's just go what Futurists said. By the way, you can view all these studies with the sources in the description. 74% is a majority of the population. As well as this, the study claims that 81% of people believe that the United States should try to lower its emissions. Again, you can check out all the statistics in the sources in the description, but let's break it down in very simple terms. If you're a Democrat, you're more likely to care about the environment than a Republican. Support for the environment by Democrats has been consistent over the past few decades. Support for the environment by Republicans has declined over the past few decades. More people, in general, care about the environment than before. So why isn't the government reacting to and representing the will of the people? Well, now we're going to talk about the government of the United States, also known as big corporations. Just kidding. We'll get into specifics of the government later. But it's important to know that companies and the government in America are intertwined, and you cannot examine one without looking at the other. Kind of like trying to look at Obama without his best friend, Biden. Yeah. The Obama-era policy of friendship. We got to repeal that soon. Right. Corporations in America. They are truly ruthless here because, well, they can be. Amazon having labor rights violations did get in the news, but did people stop using Amazon? No. And Amazon knew they wouldn't. Just in case, though, they released all the PR stuff and put on a show. It's similar with companies. They have more influence in America than can be fathomed. And they can use this influence to buy politicians and convert other people to their belief system. These politicians that they buy are nothing more than PR representatives that can actually enact change in Congress. But Congress doesn't represent the American people. They represent the people that give them power. Our republic is an illusion of democracy, with decisions primarily influenced by lobbyists and the companies that pay them. Decisions like Citizens United only augmented the terrifying imbalance of power. Look at this graph. It shows the correlation between the economic elite and government decisions. The difference in influence between average citizens and the wealthy is so broad, it's borderline criminal. This discrepancy makes sense though. Like I said, Congress represents those who gave them power, who paid for their enormous campaigns across the country, their television ads, their management teams, PR. This was paid by lobbyists and large donors. If politicians wish to be re-elected, it is unwise to bite the hand that feeds them. Doing so will only get them replaced by someone who will submit. So it seems hopeless, right? The system is so fundamentally corrupted that it's seemingly inescapable. Wrong. There are plenty of solutions to these problems, and we need to attack it from all angles. Number 1. Mobilize large voter groups to protest and pressure Congress to overturn Citizens United. Make it so enormously politically inconvenient for politicians that they have to pass a constitutional amendment and an alternate method of campaign finance. The fact is, as long as lobbyism is this influential in politics, environmental regulations will be extremely hard to enact. Number 2. Boycott for extremely long periods of time corporations that lobby against the interests of the American people. For instance, lobbying against corporations with unethical environmental practices. You want to make it so it becomes economically advantageous to invest in environmentally conscious business methods. Large groups like those mobilized by Martin Luther King Jr. overturned centuries of oppressive laws with peaceful demonstration and determination. This is what EarthRec is trying to do. More information in the description below. And lastly, as has become cliche by political activists, vote! Vote for people who represent your interests and the interests of the planet. Do at least minimal research and mobilize those around you to do the same. It's much easier for people in power to oppress others when the population is stupid. In conclusion, this is a bad situation we're in. However, it doesn't have to be like that if we implement solutions like the ones described. If we unflinchingly demand reforms that will save both us and the earth, those in power will have no choice but to obey. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. As always, you can find more information in the description below. If you liked this video, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us out. You can also follow us on Instagram at Ecocentric. Well, that's all for me. That's your turn to save the world. See you next week. However, it doesn't have to be like that if we implement the solutions we described. However, it doesn't have to be like that if we implement solutions like the ones described.